what are the top 2 or 3 things that should be in a contract that a lot of people overlook or don't think through it too much?
A way out is probably my
Yeah.
number one thing, a
Yeah.
way out. Yeah. And, a lot of that, we do kinda like as I have a master's degree in English, which has nothing to do with anything other than the fact I'm pretty good with wording things in such a way that we can kinda get through some stuff in contracts, which is good. I mean, it came out to something other than just, what my mother told me would never make anything of. But so, making something a condition precedent to closing, something that doesn't we're still saying our earnest money deposit is non-refundable, but a condition to us closing is that we have to have X, Y, or Z. So a way out's probably the number one thing I would say. The number two thing I would say is what obligations are you taking on of the sellers that you may or may not be able to realistically do smoothly? And I say that because we get a lot of things where we had a retail shopping center close last week. And in that shopping center, there were several tenants. A couple of them were still in the tenant improvements area. Some of the leasing commissions were still out there. Um, we didn't approve any of the plans. We don't know who did approve the plans. And the seller wanted to put those funds into an escrow where basically the title company would decide whether or not to pay out that money. That's not realistic. That's something that you have to look for ahead of time. On properties, if you're buying multifamily properties, just as an example, the first thing I'm generally going to ask you about the property is what year is it? What vintage is it? Because I'm trying to figure out, are we going to find bad plumbing? Are we going to find a bad electrical box? Are we going to find something that's going to kill this deal because there's no way you can bring in enough money to fix that? Or are we going to find that so late in the game that the lender is not going to lend until it's fixed and we don't have the runway to get it done? And so figuring out what obligations we're putting on ourselves that are not realistic is probably the second part of the PSA that I worry about. It's not the clauses in the PSA that say you got 30 days of due diligence and 15 days to look at title and 10 days to do objections. Every real estate attorney that's worth their salt can do those things. They write out a timeline, they check off the boxes. It's not that hard. Um, but what happens whenever something's outside of those boxes? That's where the problems are.
What about extensions? What are you recommending? One extension, 2 extensions, 100 extensions, or as many as you can get? What does that look like generally?
I normally do 2 extensions of 15 days if I can get them. I figure that's an extra month, gets us to the next, it's crazy, but sometimes tax prorations alone, that extra month will save you, if you have to have it to just bend it back. So 30 days is typically what I'm gonna look for, and then beyond that, we hope to goodness that if we have to have them, that somebody's gonna work with us. But usually you can't get past that,
Do,
so.
do, do you ever see issues with these are kind of more technical things that I always think through too. Do you ever have any issues with the seller getting into contract when it's not really the seller, meaning they get into their personal name when maybe the seller's a trust or an LLC? Is that a way for sort of sellers to get out of things, or is that not something you really are too concerned about?
I think sometimes sellers have, cheap laser eye surgery attorneys too, so, sometimes they go in the wrong names, and sometimes then you have to get an assignment and try and work with that, but most of the time, sellers are not scrounging around for the next big deal, at least not right now, not in this market. I think that, seller default was a problem, say, a year and a half ago, because they'd get a better deal, and they didn't care whether or not they sold to you or not. There was no sense of propriety about stuff like that. So the first time that you skipped a step, they were in there to call default and sell it to the next guy.
So if you enjoyed this clip and you want to see the entire episode, click here. And if you want to see other videos similar to this, click here.